We are back with another buy, sell, hold. Two more wide receivers here. Starting off with maybe at one point the wide receiver one in the middle of the 2020 season. DK Metcalf, still only 26 and a half years old. Keep trade cut wide receiver 19, startup ADP 505, wide receiver 21. He's worth a mid to late first round pick. You see his numbers there since that 2020 season. 21st in points per game, 27th and 20th. Not, I think a lot of people would expect that to be higher. I think total points in one of those years, he was considered like a top 12 or 14 guy. Might have been the 2021 season, but not big numbers, which is why he's kind of just fallen since being potentially wide receiver one. I'll actually start here with DK. I guess I'm really high on the Seahawks because, like I talked about Kenneth Walker, I expect a big season. I expect a big season from DK Metcalf this year. I expect, again, the offense to pass it a little bit more, although they were fifth, I think, in pass percentage, like the percentage of their plays being passes, 61%, which was fifth most. So keep that in mind. By the way, the Jets were fourth most. That's kind of weird. Just noticed that. But I expect them to throw it a little bit more. I expect the offense to be better. I expect DK Metcalf to play that Roma Dunze role because the offensive coordinator of the Washington college team is now the offensive coordinator of the Seahawks. And again, college to NFL, it's a little bit different, but he produced Roma Dunze, a top 10 pick, Jalen Polk, a top 40 pick, and then Jalen McMillan, a third round pick. Like, he had three receivers dominating, which is why I'm just high on like JSN and Metcalf playing that Roma Dunze role. So I think he's going to have a big year. Like, he's kind of my dark horse to be like a top 5 or 7 receiver, outside of the guys that are ranked in the top 10 or so. Like, he's kind of my dark horse to finish as like a difference-making wide receiver one. So I think I'm kind of in on DK Metcalf. And I'm fine with kind of like throwing the 108. Like, what's the 108? Worthy, Brian Thomas, maybe Bowers, maybe McCarthy or probably not McCarthy, maybe Bo Nix. So like, I think I'm okay with that, like taking Metcalf there. What about you?
I just had a question about because I was looking at, I have him a lot higher like each year basically. Where is he here? For his finishes. That's what those are, right? Wide receiver finishes in the parentheses.
Points per game.
Oh, maybe that's what it is. I don't know.
Yeah, so last year he was 20. Do I have 20? Yeah, 20th last year. Yeah, one of those years his finish was way better because he doesn't miss games.
Yeah,
Him and Lockett are notorious. They're notorious for that.
That must be what it is. It's just
Yeah.
and there is something to be said about that too, because I mean, so just by contrast, working from 2021 up, like he finished. This is in half point total points. Wide receiver 11, 18, and 16.
Yeah. Which makes sense for not missing. Yeah, that 2021 season, there's a couple guys that you should remove. Like Cyril Grayson Jr. played in 3 games and he averaged 13.2 points.
Who the fuck is that?
He had 11 and he played 3 games. He had 11 and a half, 11 and 17.1 fantasy points.
For who?
I don't even know. Maybe Jacksonville or something. Kristen Wilkerson was wide receiver 3 in points per game that year. He had 1 game of 18.2 points. So yeah, he was more in the top, like comfortably in the top, like 18.
Yeah.
If you remove some of those guys, but
yeah. Okay. So regardless, what the hell? These names. We're supposed to know these guys too. Yeah, I think Metcalf is I think he's a buy at that. Like I think he has a good chance to finish above those outside of the big 3 wide receivers for this draft class. Like I don't know. It depends on how the board falls. For sure. Because I mean the 108 is basically Brock Bowers, either McCarthy or May, because May kind of slipped quite a bit, or a Doomsday, basically.
Yeah, I don't know I don't think McCarthy or May are getting there in a super
No,
flex.
I mean, I saw anyways, like I think people were pretty low on May in general, but I mean, it's one of those 4 guys, I would say, right? Like between May, McCarthy, Bowers, or a Doomsday, right? Because it's the other 3 receivers and the 2 quarterbacks.
You got the top 3 receivers, the top 3 quarterbacks, so that's 6. And then I assume McCarthy's going like 7 in most leagues. So then I think it's more like realistically like Knicks, Bowers, Knicks, Bowers, Worthy, Brian Thomas. Like maybe May or McCarthy sneak in there, but I think for most drafts those guys are going the top 7.
Yeah. Maybe I'm just like, it's been long enough since our rookie draft to where I guess maybe I'm thinking there's more guys up there than there are. But anyways, I think that's probably fair value. I'd rather have him as a proven dude who's done it year over year, as a solid, basically wide receiver 2 with that wide receiver 1 upside. Like we saw him finish 6th in his second year. I don't necessarily think he's going to do that. I do think that format is very dependent here too. He's not as good in PPR, obviously. Like he does draw a fair amount of targets and he has that big play ability, but he does get the touchdowns in general. Yeah. And so you're playing in a league with any kind of scoring bonuses for long touchdowns and stuff. I think that shoots him up a little bit too. But yeah, we do anticipate more JSN involvement. I don't know if that necessarily, I don't think that affects Metcalf as much as it's going to affect Lockett. But yeah, I mean, if you have the 108 and you want to get like a more guaranteed piece, like if you're good at tight end / quarterback or whatever, like I don't think that's like outside the realm of possibility. I also do think though that you are able to get Metcalf for cheaper than that. So yeah, I don't know. He's kind of a weird one because I think people that have him might have a little bit of, well, he was, like you said, the wide receiver 1, 3 years ago or whatever, in value. So yeah, I can kind of see that going both ways, but I wouldn't. Again, roster construction is important here, but yeah, I'd feel much more comfortable if it was the 110 or even the 109, honestly.
Yeah, it's interesting though. Like if you are getting what he's been the last 3 years, which, like you said, he has been there every game. That's something to keep in mind. But in terms of points per game, he's been more of a low-end wide receiver 2. Then I think this is an overpay. The 108, a mid-first, even the 109 potentially. I just think it's going to take a step up for the next couple of years, I think there's going to be more volume, more passes, faster pace, more touchdown opportunities. So I expect him to get into like comfortably like that top 15 in points per game, more as a high-end wide receiver 2 than a low-end that he has been.
Yeah, I think if you're starting him as your wide receiver 2, like you're happy, because he does have that wide receiver 1 upside, and he shouldn't necessarily be like a low end guy. I don't know. When we talk about wide receiver 2, we never really like spell it all out, but there is like 40 of those guys, it seems like, so. Yeah.
Christian Kirk's the other guy. I think he's interesting to talk about. He's 27 and a half years old. Keep trade cut wide receiver 36. Startup ADP is an early 9th round as a wide receiver 39. You can get him for an early 2nd round pick. You see his numbers there. I think the last 2 years are really what we should be looking at. His 2021, he was in Arizona, just different role. 2020, he was wide receiver 19 in points per game. Better than DK Metcalf, right? No one would expect that. And last year, 2023, 10.1 points per game, wide receiver 35. However, if you do kind of take out the bookend games, the one game to begin the year where he just did nothing and people were freaking the hell out, including me. If you take that game out and then the game where he essentially just left right away, I think he was like a wide receiver 20 in points per game, wide receiver 19. So he was much better in that stretch of games. I'm just going to take out week 13. So weeks 2 to 12, essentially. He was wide receiver 16 overall and wide receiver 19 in points per game. So he has been a low end wide receiver 2 the last 2 years, essentially, is kind of how I'm looking at it with the Jaguars and Trevor Lawrence. So, but he's being treated as more of a, fringe wide receiver 3. So is he a buy with a early second round or potentially even a mid-second round pick? Because I don't think anyone's too excited about Christian Kirk.
Yeah, I don't think anyone's very excited about him. I think I was going to say that goes without saying, but not necessarily, I guess. I do think his role in this offense is like solid. Like he is going to be basically the number one target. But at the same time, I was a little surprised to like kind of look at his numbers and be like, oh, I thought he would have been a little bit more, I don't know how much more, just involved, I guess, like as far as like his targets and everything like that. 85 last year in 12 games, but like you said, there was one game that didn't count there, and because he literally played 1% of snaps. He did get a catch though.
It was more like 80 in 10 games, which is almost 140 targets over 17 games.
Yeah, and honestly, that's kind of what I was expecting a little bit more out of him, and that's a little bit closer to where he was in 2022. Like, the Jacksonville paid the Jaguars tax. They had to pay him to get him to go there, kind of a thing. I do think he is like the dude for Trevor Lawrence. I think his touchdown upside is not great necessarily between ETN and the deep ball guys. Like Trevor Lawrence does like to throw that deep ball, and they got Gabe Davis now, and I know they can use Brian Thomas that way too. They got Ingram for I was gonna say for the end zone, but that wasn't really like his role either. I mean, it was more of a Calvin Ridley role last year with all the red zone targets. So, I mean, his touchdowns could go up. I don't think you should expect more than 6 necessarily, and if it is, definitely you can't count on him for double digit touchdowns. So, I think the thing I'd much rather have Metcalf, and obviously we see the difference between the two in how they're ranked, I think they should be a little closer, but not that close. I don't know. There's a huge glut of guys right there, from wide receiver, 16, 17, all the way up to Christian Kirk, basically. I'd be happy to pay the early to mid second for him. I think he's a solid guy that you can just start every year or every week, rather. And not really worry about it. He is creeping up there in age, and like we've never really seen like that huge like dominator season from him, which is why I would prefer Metcalf. Like I think his ceiling is just so much higher, but I think he's a very safe like floor play in general. Kirk.
Yeah, I just look at that 10 game stretch, excluding those bookend games, and some really good numbers, and like. Again, 140 targets. I think it was like 95 catches and almost 1,300 yards. Now, the touchdowns are lacking, like you said, only 5. But I would assume that would have some positive regression, at least closer to like the 8s that he had in 2022. You talk about those numbers, 90 catches, 1,300 yards, and like even 7 touchdowns. That's really good numbers, And I think people are kind of, it's more about, it's not even comparing him to Metcalf for me. It's just more about like people don't think of him. I think he's a guy that's going to finish as a top 24 receiver in points per game. And people definitely don't treat him that way, Sure. Maybe because of the lack of upside and stuff like that. But I I don't know. Like, I'm not worried about, like, obviously Evan Ingram's there, who's potentially, definitely his biggest target competition. You have Gabe Davis, who was playing with, Josh Allen as the wide receiver 2 and never had more than 93 targets in a season. Brian Thomas kind of reminds me a little bit of Gabe Davis, especially year one. Just more of like, he's not going to be a target hog. So I think it's going to be, a huge percentage going to Kirk and Evan Ingram. And I think there's some positive touchdown regression. I think Ridley being gone actually helps him because it feels like they were kind of forcing it to Ridley. Ridley had 140 targets himself in 17 games. So there's definitely enough targets to go around. And I just think this offense hopefully is just going to be better and more efficient than, a little bit more about what we were expecting heading into last year than what we got last year. So, I think he's a definite buy because I also think you just get him cheaper. Like we said, no one's really excited about him.
I do think he gets overlooked quite a bit for sure, which I think was kind of like what you were driving at, like just because last year it was Ridley and, and then like it basically ended as, like ETN and Ingram kind of like stealing the thunder a little bit, given how high those two positions finished on the team. And now it's kind of like, well, he's got more competition in the receiver game. And it's like, I don't think that's true. Like, I think like what you said holds a lot of water with Gabe Davis and Thomas, like profiling very similar as far as not being target hogs and stuff. And it's like, you got to ignore the whole Tank Bigsby thing again, until you see it. I do think he has like a vital role to play. Like he is going to be the possession guy, like on this offense for sure. And I think that's really valuable, because the Jags should be better,
Hopefully they are. But it is probably just the lack of like potential upside here. So, I just think again, I think he's going to be a top 24 receiver in, this is for redraft too. Like, I don't think anyone's drafting him that way. Wonder what his Fantasy Pros ADP right now, which is a little wonky because it's July 4th, and stuff like that. But currently in half PPR leagues, he's being drafted as wide receiver 30. So more as a wide receiver 3 once again. But anything else with these two, Metcalf or Kirk?
No, I'm just kind of looking at like the receiver rankings on Keep Trade Cut. I don't know. I think that's it. Like, I think he's a solid buy. I think both these guys are a solid buy. But I don't know. Metcalf makes me a little more nervous, I guess. Like at that 108, even though I do think he's like the one to have if you had to pick between these two, But again, I think you can get these guys cheaper than what they've gone for potentially, especially if they're on a team that's not even close to contention, like float it out there and, start the negotiations.
Yeah. And also like, you don't even necessarily need to trade straight up for him. Like getting him as kind of like, not a throw in, but like a tear down, like if you want to say like, I'm going to move off of T Higgins, I'm going to get Christian Kirk and, a really nice pick or something, a first round pick, or I don't know who's doing that, but maybe someone will, right? Or throw another player in there that's closer to the top 24 and you can potentially do that. And there's a chance that not only does Christian Kirk outproduce him, but you just added to, your assets. So, So
I'm just looking through the list. I'm like, I wonder who you could do that for, like maybe like a Michael Pittman or something like that. Get that first on top of it, Christian Kirk and a first for Pittman. It's like, I don't mind that really.
What's funny is, like, again, if we take Christian Kirk's numbers Okay, 11.7 points last year if we take out those bookend games. Like Michael Pittman wasn't that far ahead of him, 12.2 last year. You know, Michael Pittman's been, we talked about it because we talked about him. You know, Michael Pittman was worse than Christian Kirk by a point and a half essentially in 2022, and he was only half a point better than him last year. So like, you don't expect that at all. But it's like,
I know.
That's why
when I was looking through the list, I was kind of like, people are, I don't know. I think I might have said this during the Pittman video, but I just think he's a little overvalued. And so he's a great, like, kind of jump off of him, and people, and someone's probably high enough on him to get him for a first, because I don't think you're getting Michael Pittman for a first, you know, like, even though he is right there with Metcalf, like he's literally right behind him, almost the same value. So maybe people won't give up that that first in on top of Kirk. You know, if you have to throw in like Pittman and a third to get a first and Kirk, you know, like that would be great.
Yeah. And there's only a year difference between those two, by the way. So one's 26 and one's 26.7, one's 27.6. So Christian Kirk is, play around with it. It's made me think about it as well. Might go try and acquire Christian Kirk somewhere. But yeah, I think that's it for these buy, sell, holds for now. Season's coming up, so you know, maybe we'll revisit this in October or something, and when things are, you know, action on the field. But we'll definitely keep putting stuff out. Appreciate all the support, and we will catch you guys in the next video. Happy 4th of July.